The MSI 5700 XT Evoke was, it was a fine card in many respects, but ran extremely loud. Almost as loud as a reference model in our testing, and that's just unacceptable for an aftermarket cooler. Steve Burke also found insufficient thermal pad coverage over the card's memory chips. I can confirm it wasn't an isolated issue, and that's just unacceptable in a card of this caliber, despite the fact that, at least in my testing, memory temps were okay. It's just not a good practice. So when I found out MSI wanted to work with us on a new project involving the card, that's not what this video is, just FYI, I told them, no, not until you fix its issues. I'm not gonna work with and promote a card that has blatant QC problems. And their response was to send this. This is an MSI 5700 Evoke GP, the non-XT Evoke variant with supposedly extra thermal pad coverage, at least that's what I was told. We're gonna tear it apart and check on that, but I first wanna check Temps before tampering with internals to see if the issues plaguing the Evoke family in the past are still lurking. Namely, a hot cooler or an extremely loud cooler. Usually it's one or the other. Stick around.
The Be Quiet PureBase 500 is a serious compact mid-tower contender. It packs enough space for a 360mm AIO, full-size ATX motherboard, and extended graphics card, along with a 140mm bracket at the rear. It comes with interchangeable top covers for either airflow or silence. You can snag it in white, black, and metallic gray. Large power supply is welcome, nearly an inch of cable management space behind the motherboard tray. Whew, I could go on. Check it out via the link below.
So I must confess, I'm a bit bummed they didn't send us a revised 5700 XT. Would make for a great comeback story. So this isn't necessarily an apples to apples comparison. I don't intend for it to be. But I imagine many of you are still weary of the non-XT model and other MSI models given its bigger brother's rather obvious issues. I won't be revealing many gaming benchmarks because frankly, there's nothing special here. There wasn't even with the 5700 XT Evoke. I mean, this is a 5700 that performs slightly better than reference thanks to an aftermarket cooler and thus additional thermal headroom. Whoop-de-doo. That's really no surprise to anybody, and you're likely to pay a tiny premium at least for a card like this. This one is identical in terms of its aesthetics to the XT Evoke with the same 8+6 pin supplemental power config and the same controversial gold design. I personally don't mind it. I think it's a nice change of pace and it's not too gaudy in the sense that it's not like shaped weird. It's not overly large. It's gold. You know, you either like gold or you don't. You'll find one HDMI port and 3 display ports at the rear, and that's really about it for special features, if you want to call it special features. The fancy BIOS switches or LEDs are not present on this card. It does have a stop fan function for silent operation at idle, which is nice, but you won't find any abnormal behavior elsewhere, which, yeah, I guess that's all right. Power consumption is fairly moderate, only a slight bump from stock, and the subtle variances in clock speed mean you should expect only small bumps here and there in performance over the reference model. And I guess that's all right too, right? For a card that runs a little over 350 USD. I mean, it's a lot of money, I get it, but compared to 450 bucks for the 5700 XT, I don't think this is a bad deal. But let's be honest, where it's really gonna count with this card is in the thermal and noise department, so let's see how those fared. First up, temps across the board. I clocked 88 degrees Celsius at the junction, 74 degrees for the memory, it's GDDR6 in this case, and 71 degrees on the GPU, and that's what you're seeing in this graph. Junction or hotspot temps often run upwards of 100 degrees Celsius and higher, and are still deemed within spec by nature of how this temperature is measured, so I don't see any apparent issues here. Memory looks great too, to my surprise. I didn't see any throttling or anything of any kind, and substrate temps are nice and cool, just over 70 degrees Celsius. But I mean, so what? The XT Evoke temps were decent too. It was the sound that really killed it. The card had to ramp up its fan curve to remain cool enough to be deemed acceptable for an aftermarket cooler. I was so surprised though by how well the 5700 GP performed. The card ran ultra quiet. My personal rig at idle, which was sitting about 8 feet away, was making more noise than this test bench. And granted, we were running it on open air, but I imagine any case with modest airflow would yield similar figures, and we've proven that when you run an open air test bench, but then you also have fans in a case actively pulling fresh air, and you're talking about a case that doesn't inhibit airflow very much, it could actually be beneficial to run a system in a case. So depending on how you look at it, it could be a pro or a con. And look, I know this is just the 5700, not the XT. It's a lower spec card, so I expect it on paper to run a bit, cooler clock for clock. But this thing was incredibly quiet under our dirt rally load for 30 minutes. Have a listen. I was actually a bit concerned because I didn't feel like the card was under a heavy enough load in the Dirt Rally benchmark. I always use Dirt Rally because you just loop that benchmark for 30 minutes straight. It's consistent, it's repetitive over and over. But the GPU was pegging 100% usage, and memory was under load as well. And those temps, you saw them earlier, were within spec, and the card was extremely quiet. The fan curve is super conservative here, and the card still managed to stay very quiet under that load. So I'm impressed. I didn't expect that. And I actually clocked this card as being quieter than the 5700 XT, Red Dragon, and Gaming OC variants. Again, not exactly apples to apples, but that's still pretty astounding if I'm being frank. And I even struggled at times to pick up the sounds that the card was making with the shotgun mic under load. It's not the quietest card, I want to stress that. I've tested quieter cards, you can see on the chart, but it's an awfully close competitor. But now, let's take it apart. Did MSI actually do what they said they did? Did they replace the thermal pads? Did they add thermal pads? Based on my own testing, I'd assume they did, but I want to take a look anyway. And wow, same size thermal pads that I found in our 5700 XT Evoke sample. Honestly, kind of disappointing. And I'm going off script here at this point because MSI has gotten back to me personally and talked about what they had said they did to this card prior to me agreeing to use it in the sponsored video that I mentioned earlier. By the way, that's not happening anymore. And the reason why I'm not doing the sponsored video with this card is because I don't feel comfortable using it, recommending it, given the size of the thermal pads over the memory chips. And you might be thinking, okay, Greg, well, the card performed admirably. You were in love with this card until 30 seconds ago. So why all of a sudden are you not recommending it? It's not that I'm not recommending it. I'm sure some of you will still look at this card and consider it strongly because of how well it performed. And yeah, there is an argument to be had about, well, the pads obviously work good enough because memory temps were low enough under heavy load. And sure, but again, two things I want to bring up about that. First off, variance between cards is slightly unpredictable. It tends to be rather minimal when we're talking about the exact same card. Just because you and I have the same 5700 Evoke, though, doesn't mean that they're going to perform identically. So I can't speak to variance, and I think that variance increases when you don't fully cover a memory chip with a thermal pad, because all areas of the memory chip in question produce heat, not just the center of it. And two, people overclock memory. It's not just the GPU. So when you overclock memory with a thermal pad that's not covering but maybe half of the chip in question, you could see temps that spike in an unorthodox fashion, very just unpredictable. It kind of sucks because this card is awesome. It's one of the best, quietest, coolest cards I've ever tested in this performance category, especially. But I don't know why they wouldn't just increase the size of the thermal pads in the production process. How hard can that be? And why is it all of a sudden a big issue with just these MSI cards? The story changed because of what MSI told me. I had thought originally I was being misled. Apparently that wasn't the case. MSI was just telling me that they put thermal pads in different places to kind of make up for some heat issues. And perhaps that did help. I don't have a 5700 sample before the thermal pads were on here and whatever else they did with the power config, but I can tell you the card performs really well on paper despite the blaring, obvious issue with the thermal pad size over the memory chips. I really don't know where to go from here. I kind of want to know what you guys think about this, because if the card performs fine, in my testing across the board it was great, should that be all that matters? Or are you concerned about that variance between cards? Are you concerned about manually overclocking memory? That is really all I can say at this point. I don't want to... I personally wouldn't recommend it just because of that, just for peace of mind's sake, because I don't know exactly how this will affect other cards in the family. But you might feel totally different. You might still think the card is worth buying, especially at its price. So let me know in the comments below. I will link it if you want to check it out. I'm sure some of you will be interested in buying it, maybe just to test it on your own. I welcome that, of course. But yeah, I'm going to leave this kind of open-ended because I did not expect the card to, first off, perform as well as it did, and then second off, do it in spite of having such small thermal pads. Maybe other channels, other outlets will find different results, but I test this like I test all other graphics cards that come into the studio, and memory, at least to me, temps look fine. So what do you guys think? Comments, that's what the comment section is for. Leave something down there, I'll be sure to check those out. Give me a thumbs up if you like the video, and click the subscribe button if you haven't already. I appreciate that. Such a weird ending. I really didn't expect this. I had written the first half of the script as I was benchmarking, and then I had to write the second half with a totally different mentality because I didn't expect it to have this issue. If you even want to call it an issue, I don't know. I think it's an issue, but you might not, just based on how the card performs. Let me know. I'll catch you down there and in the next video. My name's Greg. Thanks for learning with me.